The Battle of Arras was a British offensive on the Western Front during World War I. For the 9th of April to the 16th of May 1917, British troops attacked German defences near the French city of Arras on the Western Front. There were big gains on the first day, followed by stalemate. The battle cost nearly 160,000 British and about 125,000 German casualties. For much of the war, the opposing armies on the Western Front were at a stalemate, with a continuous line of trenches stretching from the Belgian coast to the Swiss border. The Allied objective from early 1915 was to break through the German defences into the open ground beyond and engage the numerically inferior German army in a war of movement. The British attack at Arras was part of the French Nivelle offensive, the main part of which was to take place 50 miles to the south. The aim of this combined operation was to end the war in 48 hours. At Arras, the British were to divert German troops from the French front and to take the German-held high ground that dominated the plain of Douai. The British effort was a relatively broad front assault between Vimy in the northwest and Bullecourt in the southeast. After considerable bombardment, Canadian troops of the 1st Army in the north fought Battle of Vimy Ridge and captured the ridge. The 3rd Army in the centre advanced astride the Scarpe River, making the deepest penetration since trench warfare began, and in the south, the 5th Army attacked the Hindenburg Line and was frustrated by the defence in depth, making only minimal gains. The British armies then engaged in a series of small-scale operations to consolidate the new positions. Although these battles were generally successful in achieving limited aims, these were gained at the price of relatively large numbers of casualties. When the battle officially ended on the 16th of May, British Empire troops had made significant advances but had been unable to achieve a breakthrough. New tactics and the equipment to exploit them had been used, showing that the British had absorbed the lessons of the Battle of the Somme and could mount set-piece attacks against fortified field defences. The Arras sector then returned to the stalemate that typified most of the war on the Western Front, except for attacks around Lens, culminating in the Canadian Battle of Hill 70 in August. Background: at the beginning of 1917, the British and French were still searching for a way to achieve a strategic breakthrough on the Western Front. The previous year had been marked by the costly success of the Franco-British offensive astride the River Somme, while the French had been unable to take the initiative because of intense German pressure at Verdun until after August 1916. Both battles consumed enormous quantities of resources while achieving virtually no strategic gains on the battlefield. Nonetheless, the cost to Germany of containing the Anglo-French attacks had been high, and given that the material preponderance of the Entente and its allies could only be expected to increase in 1917, Hindenburg and Ludendorff decided on a defensive strategy on the Western Front for that year. This impasse reinforced the French and British commanders' belief that to end the stalemate they needed a breakthrough. While this desire may have been the main impetus behind the offensive, the timing and location were heavily influenced by a number of political and tactical factors. Politics: the mid-war years were momentous times. Governing politicians in Paris and London were under great pressure from the press, the people and the parliaments to bring the war to a victorious close. The casualties from the battles of Gallipoli, the Somme and Verdun had been high and there was little prospect of victory in sight. The British Prime Minister H.H. Asquith resigned in early December 1916 and was succeeded by the Welsh wizard David Lloyd George. In France, Premier Aristide Briand, along with General Hubert Lyautey as Minister of Defense, were politically diminished and resigned in March 1917. The United States was close to declaring war on Germany. American public opinion was growing increasingly incensed by a long succession of high-profile U-boat attacks upon civilian shipping, starting with the sinking of RMS Lusitania in 1915 and culminating in the torpedoing of 7 American merchantmen in early 1917. The United States Congress finally declared war on Imperial Germany on 6 April 1917, but it would be more than a year before a suitable army could be raised, trained, and transported to France. Strategy. Although the French and British had intended to launch a spring offensive in 1917, the strategy was threatened in February, when the Russians admitted that they could not meet the commitment to a joint offensive, which reduced the two-front offensive to a French assault along the Aisne River. In March, the German army in the west withdrew to the Hindenburg Line in Operation Alberic, which negated the tactical assumptions underlying the plans for the French offensive, until French troops advanced to compensate during the battles of Arras. They encountered no German troops in the assault sector when it became uncertain whether the offensive would go forward. The French government desperately needed a victory to avoid civil unrest, but the British were wary of proceeding, in view of the rapidly changing tactical situation. In a meeting with Lloyd George, French Commander-in-Chief General Nivelle persuaded the British Prime Minister that if the British launched a diversionary assault to draw German troops away from the Aisne sector, the French offensive could succeed. It was agreed in the London Convention of 16 January that the French assault on the Aisne would begin in mid-April and that the British would make a diversionary attack in the Arras sector, approximately 1 week prior. Tactics. British Expeditionary Force. 3 armies of Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, were in the Arras sector, the 5th Army in the south, the 3rd Army in the centre and the 1st Army in the north, and the plan was devised by Allenby. Division Attack Training. In December 1916, the training manual SS-135 replaced SS-109 of 8 May 1916 and marked a significant step in the evolution of the British Expeditionary Force into a homogeneous force, well adapted to its role on the Western Front. The duties of army, corps and divisions in planning attacks were standardized. Armies were to devise the plan and the principles of the artillery component. Corps were to allot tasks to divisions, which would then select objectives and devise infantry plans subject to corps approval. Artillery planning was controlled by corps with consultation of divisions by the corps general officer commanding Royal Artillery, which became the title of the officer at each level of command who devised the bombardment plan, which was coordinated with neighboring corps artillery commanders by the Army GSCRA. Specific parts of the bombardment were nominated by divisions, using the local knowledge and the results of air reconnaissance. The corps artillery commander was to coordinate counter-battery fire and the howitzer bombardment for 0 hour. Corps controlled the creeping barrage, but divisions were given authority over extra batteries added to the barrage, which could be switched to other targets by the divisional commander and brigade commanders. SS-135 provided the basis for the BEF's operational technique for the rest of 1917. Platoon Attack Training. The Training Manual SS-143 of February 1917 marked the end of attacks made by lines of infantry with a few detached specialists. The platoon was divided into a small headquarters and 4 sections, one with 2 trained grenade throwers and assistants, the second with a Lewis gun and 9 assistants carrying 30 drums of ammunition. The third section comprised a sniper, scout and 9 riflemen, and the fourth section had 9 men with 4 rifle grenade launch. The rifle and hand grenade sections were to advance in front of the Lewis gun and rifle grenade sections, in 2 waves or in artillery formation, which covered an area 100 yards wide and 50 yards deep, with the 4 sections in a diamond pattern, the rifle section ahead, rifle grenade and bombing sections to the sides, and the Lewis gun section behind, until resistance was met. German defenders were to be suppressed by fire from the Lewis gun and rifle grenade sections, while the riflemen and hand grenade sections moved forward, preferably by infiltrating round the flanks of the resistance, to overwhelm the defenders from the rear. The changes in equipment, organization and formation were elaborated in SS-144, the normal formation for the attack of February 1917, which recommended that the leading troops should push on to the final objective, when only 1 or 2 were involved, but that for a greater number of objectives, when artillery covering fire was available for the depth of the intended advance, fresh platoons should leapfrog through the leading platoons to the next objective. The new organizations and equipment gave the infantry platoon the capacity for fire and maneuver, even in the absence of adequate artillery support, to bring uniformity and adoption of the methods laid down in the revised manuals and others produced over the winter. Haig established a BEF training directorate in January 1917 to issue manuals and oversee training. SS-143 and its companion manuals like SS-144 provided British infantry with off-the-peg tactics, devised from the experience of the Somme and from French army operations, to go with the new equipment made available by increasing British and Allied war production and better understanding of the organization necessary to exploit it in battle. Tactics. German Army. In a new manual of 1 December 1916, Grundsätze für die Führung in der Abwehrschlacht im Stellungskrieg, the policy of unyielding defensive ground regardless of its tactical value, was replaced by the defense of positions suitable for artillery observation and communication with the rear, where an attacking force would fight itself to a standstill and use up its resources while the defenders conserve the strength. Defending infantry would fight in areas, with the front divisions in an outpost zone up to 3,000 yards deep behind listening posts, with the main line of resistance placed on a reverse slope in front of artillery observation posts, which were kept far enough back to retain observation over the outpost zone. Behind the main line of resistance was a Großkampf zone of second defensive area 1,500–2,500 yards deep, also sighted as far as possible on ground hidden from enemy observation, while in view of German artillery observers. A Rückordnungskampf zone further back was to be occupied by the reserve battalion of each regiment. Allgemeines Überstellungsbau was published in January 1917, and by April an outpost zone held by sentries had been built along the Western Front. Sentries could retreat to larger positions held by Stoßtrupps, who would join the sentries to recapture sentry posts by immediate counterattack. Defensive procedures in the battle zone were similar but with greater numbers. The front trench system was the sentry line for the battle zone garrison, which was allowed to move away from concentrations of enemy fire and then counter-attack to recover the battle and outpost zones. Such withdrawals were envisaged as occurring on small parts of the battlefield which had been made untenable by Allied artillery fire, as the prelude to Gegenstoß in der Stellung. Such a decentralized battle by large numbers of small infantry detachments would present the attacker with unforeseen obstructions. Resistance from troops equipped with automatic weapons, supported by observed artillery fire, would increase the further the advance progressed. A school was opened in January 1917 to teach infantry commanders the new methods. Given the Allies' growing superiority in munitions and manpower, attackers might still penetrate to the second line, leaving in the wake German garrisons isolated in wider Standsnester, still inflicting losses and disorganization on the attackers. As the attackers tried to capture the widers and dig in near the German second line, Sturm battalions and Sturmregimenter of the counter-attack divisions would advance from the Rückwartkampf zone into the battle zone, in an immediate counter-attack. If the immediate counter-attack failed, the counter-attack divisions would take the time to prepare a methodical attack, provided the lost ground was essential to the retention of the main position. Such methods required large numbers of reserve divisions ready to move to the battlefront. The reserve was obtained by creating 22 divisions by internal reorganization of the army, bringing divisions from the Eastern Front and by shortening the Western Front in Operation Alberic. By the spring of 1917, the German army in the West had a strategic reserve of 40 divisions. German Sixth Army. Experience of the German First Army in the Somme battles was published on 30 January 1917. Ludendorff's new defensive methods had been controversial. During the Battle of the Somme in 1916, Colonel Fritz von Lossberg had been able to establish a line of relief divisions, with the reinforcements from Verdun, which began to arrive in greater numbers in September. In his analysis of the battle, Fritz von Lossberg opposed the granting of discretion to front trench garrisons to retire, as he believed that maneuver did not allow the garrisons to evade Allied artillery fire, which could blanket the forward area and invited enemy infantry to occupy vacant areas. Lossberg considered that spontaneous withdrawals would disrupt the counter-attack reserves as they deployed and further deprive battalion and division commanders of the ability to conduct an organized defense, which the dispersal of infantry over a wider area had already made difficult. Lossberg and others had severe doubts as to the ability of relief divisions to arrive on the battlefield in time to conduct an immediate counter-attack from behind the battle zone. The skeptics wanted the Somme practice of fighting in the front line to be retained and authority devolved no further than battalion, so as to maintain organizational coherence in anticipation of a methodical counter-attack after 24 to 48 hours by the relief divisions. Ludendorff was sufficiently impressed by Lossberg's memorandum to add it to the new Manual of Infantry Training for War. General Falkenhausen, commander of the Sixth Army, arranged his infantry in the Arras area according to Lossberg and Hohn's preference for a rigid defense of the front line, supported by methodical counterattacks by the relief divisions on the second and third day. 5 Ablassungsdivisionen division were placed behind Way, 15 miles away from the front line. The new Hindenburg line ended at Telegraph Hill between Neuville-Vertas and Tilleur-les-Mouflaines, from whence the original system of 4 lines 75 to 150 yards apart ran north to the Neuville-Saint-Vaast-Bailleul road. About 3 miles behind were the Wancourt, Fuji, and to the north the Pointe du Jour lines, running from the Scarpa River north along the east slope of Vimy Ridge. The new Vautin line, which extended the Hindenburg position, was built around 4 miles further back and not entirely mapped by the Allies until the battle had begun. Just before the battle, Falkenhausen had written that parts of the front line might be lost, but the 5 Ablassungs divisions could be brought forward to relieve the front divisions. On the evening of the second day, on the 6th of April, General von Nagel, the 6th Army Chief of Staff, accepted that some of the front divisions might need to be relieved on the first evening of battle, but that any penetrations would be repulsed with local immediate counter-attacks by the front divisions. On the 7th of April, Nagel viewed the imminent British attack as a limited effort against Vimy Ridge, preparatory to a bigger attack later, perhaps combined with the French attack expected in mid-April. Construction of positions to fulfill the new policy of area defense had been drastically curtailed by shortages of labor and the long winter, which affected the setting of concrete. The 6th Army commanders had also been reluctant to encourage the British to change the plans if they detected a thinning of the front line, and were inhibited by the extent of British air reconnaissance, which observed new fieldworks and promptly directed artillery fire on them. The 6th Army failed to redeploy its artillery, which remained in lines easy to see and bombard. Work on defenses was also divided between maintaining the front line, strengthening the third line, and the new Votants to lung further back. Prelude. The British plan was well developed, drawing on the lessons of the Somme and Verdun the previous year. Rather than attacking on an extended front, the full weight of artillery would be concentrated on a relatively narrow stretch of 11 miles, from Vimy Ridge in the north to Neuville-Vertas, 4 miles south of the Scarpa River. The bombardment was planned to last about a week at all points on the line, with a much longer and heavier barrage at Vimy to weaken its strong defenses. During the assault, the troops would advance in open formation, with units leapfrogging each other to allow them time to consolidate and regroup before the action could be undertaken. A great deal of preparation was required, much of it innovative. War underground since October 1916. Royal Engineer tunneling companies had been working on the Western Front. The Artois region is chalky and easily excavated, and under the city of Arras, there is a vast network of boves. The Third Army at Arras planned to use the old underground quarries in the city in the offensive planned for April 1917. The quarries were to be linked by tunnels so that they could be used as shelters against German artillery fire and to convey troops to the front in secrecy and safety. Assault tunnels were also dug, stopping a few meters short of the German line, ready to be blown open by explosives on zero day. Conventional mines were laid under the German front line, ready to be blown immediately before the assault. German sappers also conducted underground operations, seeking out Allied tunnels to assault and countermine. Of the New Zealand tunnellers, 41 were killed and 151 were wounded by German countermining. The tunnelling effort was enormous. In one sector, 4 tunnelling companies of 500 men each worked around the clock in 18-hour shifts for 2 months. The tunnellers dug 20 kilometers of subways, tramways and railways. Just before the assault, the tunnel system had been enlarged sufficient to conceal 24,000 men, with electric lighting provided by a small powerhouse, kitchens, latrines and a medical center with an operating theater. The bulk of the work was done by the New Zealand Tunnelling Company, which included Maori and Pacific Islanders from the New Zealand Royal Pioneer Battalion and Bantams from the coalfields of northern England. War in the air. Although the Royal Flying Corps entered the battle with inferior aircraft to the Luftstreitkraft, this did not deter the commander, General Trenchard, from adopting an offensive posture. Dominance of the air over Arras was essential for reconnaissance, and the British carried out many aerial patrols. Trenchard's aircraft, acting in support of ground forces, carried out artillery spotting, photography of trench systems and bombing. The reconnaissance activities were coordinated by the 1st Field Survey Company, Royal Engineers. Aerial observation was hazardous work as, for best results, the aircraft had to fly at slow speeds and low altitude over the German defences. It became even more dangerous with the arrival of the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, with his highly experienced and better equipped Jagdgeschwader 1 in March 1917. Its deployment led to sharply increased losses of Allied pilots, and April 1917 was to become known as Bloody April. One German infantry officer later wrote, "During these days, there was a whole series of dogfights, which almost invariably ended in defeat for the British, since it was Richthofen's squadron they were up against. Often 5 or 6 planes in succession would be chased away or shot down in flames." The average flying life of a RFC pilot in Arras in April was 18 hours. Between 4 and the 8th of April, the RFC lost 75 aircraft and 105 aircrew on operations. The casualties created a pilot shortage, and replacements were sent to the front straight from flying school. During the same period, 56 aircraft were crashed by inexperienced RFC pilots. Creeping barrage. To keep enemy action to a minimum during the assault, a creeping barrage was planned. This required gunners to create a curtain of high explosive and shrapnel shell explosions that crept across the battlefield in lines, about 100 meters in advance of the assaulting troops. The Allies had previously used creeping barrages at the battles of Neuve-Chapelle and the Somme, but had encountered 2 technical problems. The first was accurately synchronizing the movement of the troops to the fall of the barrage. For Arras, this was overcome by rehearsal and strict scheduling. The second was the barrage falling erratically as the barrels of heavy guns wore swiftly but at differing rates during fire. For Arras, the rate of wear of each gun barrel was calculated and calibrated accordingly. While there was a risk of friendly fire, the creeping barrage forced the Germans to remain in the shelters, allowing Allied soldiers to advance without fear of machine gun fire. The new No. 106 instantaneous fuse had been adapted from a French design for high explosive shells so that they detonated on the slightest impact. Vaporizing barbed wire, poison gas shells were used for the final minutes of the barrage. Counter-battery fire. The principal danger to assaulting troops came from enemy artillery fire as they crossed no man's land, accounting for over half the casualties at the first day of the Somme. A further complication was the location of German artillery, hidden as it was behind the ridges. In response, specialist artillery units were created to attack German artillery. The targets were provided by 1st Field Survey Company, Royal Engineers, who collated data obtained from flash spotting and sound ranging. On 0 day, the 9th of April, over 80% of German heavy guns in the sector were neutralized by counter-battery fire. Gas shells were also used against the draft horses of the batteries and to disrupt ammunition supply columns.